What would you do if your billionaire father left you a broken pocket watch while your stepmother walked away with a $3 billion empire? What if that watch was never meant to tell time at all? Gordon Mercer died on a grey Tuesday morning in late October, and by afternoon the obituaries were already calling him a titan. The Dallas Morning News ran his photo above the fold. Forbes published a retrospective on the real estate and technology empire he'd assembled over 4 decades, conservatively valued at $3.2 billion. Tributes poured in from governors, senators, and CEOs who had sat across negotiating tables from him and lost. They remembered a man of ferocious intelligence and unyielding will. His eldest daughter, Nadine Mercer, 36, an elementary school teacher in Cincinnati, remembered a man who had once driven 3 hours to watch her in a 4th-grade Christmas pageant and who hadn't called her on a single birthday in 7 years. She flew into Dallas on a ticket already 80% over her credit limit, wearing the dark green wrap dress she saved for parent-teacher conferences and job interviews. She hadn't slept on the flight. She'd spent the 2 hours staring at the seatback in front of her, hoping for something she couldn't quite name, closure maybe, or just proof that she had existed to him at all. The law offices of Whitfield, Garvey, and Sloan occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower downtown, the lobby smelling of fresh orchids and polished stone. A receptionist's smile faltered almost imperceptibly at the sight of Nadine's dress before leading her into a conference room overlooking the entire city. The room was already full. Diane Mercer sat at the near end of the mahogany table. Gordon's second wife was 51, nearly 15 years his junior, and she wore her grief the way she wore everything else, expensively and for effect. Her black Valentino dress had probably cost more than Nadine's monthly salary. When Nadine walked in, Diane's expression shifted, quick and hard to name. Not surprise, something closer to satisfaction, the look of a woman who has been waiting for a guest she intends to humiliate. Beside her sat Felix Hartwell, 32, her son from her first marriage, who had Gordon's name on the masthead of 3 subsidiary companies and whose chief professional accomplishment appeared to be an Instagram following. Across from him sat Camille Hartwell, 29, who'd recently made news co-hosting a Sedona wellness retreat the Arizona Republic had diplomatically called legally ambiguous. Nadine sat alone at the far end. At the head of the room stood James Whitfield, 70, Gordon's attorney and closest advisor for 3 decades, lean, angular, white-haired, with the stillness of a man who had seen every variety of human desperation. He opened a leather folio, adjusted his glasses, and without preamble began to read. The estate was staggering. To Diane, the primary residence in Highland Park, the lake house in Colorado, and a 53% controlling stake in Mercer Capital Holdings, the flagship real estate investment trust. She absorbed it with practiced stillness, though her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. To Felix, the technology subsidiary, Mercer Ventures, its portfolio of 11 early-stage investments, a $42 million cash trust, and the Austin penthouse featured in Architectural Digest the previous spring. To Camille, the commercial properties in Nashville and Atlanta, a 2-decade art collection, and a cash allocation running into the tens of millions. Nadine kept her eyes on the table. She'd told herself she expected nothing. Sitting there while her family was handed a kingdom, she understood she'd been lying to herself for 7 years. She had expected something, an acknowledgement, a line in a legal document that said, she was here, she mattered, I did not forget her entirely. And finally, James Whitfield said, his voice shifting so slightly that only someone watching closely would have caught it. He turned a page. To my daughter, Nadine Claire Mercer. The room went still. Even Felix set down his phone. For her patience, her decency, and her refusal to become what this family tried to make her, I leave the sum of $0, 0 assets, and no claim to any portion of my estate. A pause. I leave her instead 1 personal item, my father's pocket watch, which she will find in the folio before her. Nadine looked down. A small manila envelope sat in front of her that she hadn't noticed. She opened it with unsteady hands. Inside was a brass pocket watch, old, its glass face cracked diagonally across the center. It didn't tick, hadn't by the look of it in years. The hands were frozen at 11:47. The silence held for exactly 2 seconds. Then Felix laughed, short, sharp, like a door slamming. A broken watch. That's incredible. That might actually be worth less than nothing. Camille pressed her lips together in a way that was technically not a smile. Diane set down her coffee cup with a small, deliberate click. Gordon always did have a sentimental streak, she said, warm with theatrical sympathy. I'm sure it means something, Nadine. A keepsake. She let the word remember hang unspoken in the air between them. A door closed in someone's face. That concludes the formal reading, Whitfield said quietly. Nadine stood, picked up the broken watch, and said nothing. There was nothing she trusted herself to say without regretting it. She nodded once at no one in particular and walked out. She made it to the hallway before her composure gave way. Pressing her back against the wall beside a tall potted ficus, breathing in through her nose and out through her mouth, telling herself with no conviction that she was fine. 7 years of silence and a broken watch. She pressed the cold brass case against her palm and felt her eyes fill. Nadine. She turned. James Whitfield had followed her out, his tie loosened, a thing she had a feeling he'd never done in a professional setting in his life. He glanced back at the closed conference room doors, then at her, and his expression was unlike anything she'd seen from him all morning. Urgent, almost afraid. I need you to come with me, he said quietly, right now before anyone comes out of that room. Mr. Whitfield, I appreciate that you're being kind, but whatever you want to say. I'm not being kind, I'm being careful. There's a significant difference. He tilted his head toward the elevator. I'll explain everything, just not here. She followed him, because she had nothing else to do, and because something in the controlled urgency of his voice told her this wasn't, in fact, over. They rode the elevator down in silence. Whitfield pressed the button for the parking garage, then turned to her. Your father did not forget you. He has not forgotten you in 36 years. What you just witnessed in that room was not his final word. It was his cover story. The doors opened onto cool concrete. A dark grey SUV with tinted windows idled near the exit. That conference room has been bugged for 14 months, Whitfield said, sliding behind the wheel as Nadine got in. We discovered it 11 months ago, when your father hired a private security firm to sweep the offices after financial information he'd discussed only in that room started showing up in Diane's communications with her attorney. He didn't remove the device. He used it. The SUV eased into Dallas traffic, heading north. Everything said in that room was for an audience, Whitfield continued. The will is entirely legal and entirely binding. Diane's attorneys reviewed it 6 weeks ago and found nothing to contest. That was the point. It had to be clean. It had to give them everything they thought they wanted. So they wouldn't look at you. Why would they look at me? Nadine's voice came out strange, flat, almost steady. I have a broken watch. Whitfield was quiet a moment. Your father told me something 3 months before he died, while we were finalizing arrangements. He said, James, if Nadine holds onto that watch when she has every reason in the world to throw it at someone's head, she's ready for what comes next. He wanted to know if the patience, the self-control were still in you. He said those were the qualities that kept you out of Diane's crosshairs all these years. He needed to know they'd held. Nadine looked down at the watch in her lap, the cracked face, the frozen hands. Open the back panel, Whitfield said. There's a latch on the upper right edge. It doesn't look like a latch. She ran her thumbnail along the edge until she felt a tiny ridge that didn't match the scrollwork. She pressed it. A quiet, precise click, and the back panel hinged open. Inside, nestled in foam cut to shape, were 2 items, a slim gunmetal grey USB drive no bigger than her thumbnail, and a thin blank white card the size of a credit card. The card opens a door, Whitfield said. We'll get to that. He changed lanes, accelerating toward the highway. The drive holds your father's final message to you, and everything you'll need to understand what happens next. Nadine closed her fingers around both. Outside the window, the Dallas skyline shrank behind them. Where are we going? Maine. They flew out of a small regional airport 40 minutes north on a private charter Nadine didn't ask about. Not how it had been arranged, or when, or under whose name. She watched Texas disappear beneath the clouds and tried to assemble what she knew into something that made sense. Her father had known he was dying. He'd spent considerable time and effort constructing an elaborate architecture around that dying, all while letting 7 years of silence sit between them. She didn't know yet whether to be grateful or furious. She suspected she'd end up being both. They landed on the coast of Maine as the sun set, the sky going orange and purple over the water. A car was waiting. The coastal road narrowed as they drove north, pavement giving way to packed gravel, then to a single-lane dirt track winding through spruce and white birch. The GPS had lost signal 20 minutes earlier. Whitfield navigated from memory, turning at markers Nadine couldn't identify, a rock formation, a gap in the tree line, a rusted gate hinge on a post with no gate attached. "My father bought property in Maine," Nadine said. "I didn't know that." No one does. The purchase went through a series of holding companies, the titles held by an entity called Lantern Ridge LLC. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Lantern Ridge was transferred entirely and irrevocably into your name. The road ended at a stone wall, and in the wall was a gate, 12 feet high, wrought iron, draped in dead vines thickened over years into something almost architectural. No keypad, no intercom. In the right-hand pillar, at chest height, a thin horizontal slot was cut so precisely into the stone it was nearly invisible. Whitfield put the car in park, the card. Nadine got out into fog that had rolled in cold and salt-smelling. She slid the card into the slot and felt it engage, a slight magnetic pull, then release. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from deep inside the stone, gears turned heavy and slow, like something remembering how to move after years of stillness. The gate swung inward, parting the vines. The driveway curved beneath a canopy of old cedars that turned the fog cathedral dim. At its end, the trees opened onto a rambling 3-story shingle-style house. Not what she'd expected. She'd braced for something ostentatious. This was something else. Dark green shingles, white trim, a wide wraparound porch, 3 chimneys, every window dark. It should have looked abandoned. Instead, it looked like it had been waiting, patiently, for someone to come home. A lighthouse stood at the edge of the property, where the clearing fell away to the cliff above the ocean, its light dark. "Built in 1908 by a shipping magnate," Whitfield said, joining her. "Your father bought it in 2009 through Lantern Ridge. He came here 6 times in the last 15 years, always alone, always telling Diane he was fishing in Canada. It doesn't appear on any of his personal financial disclosures." At the front door, in place of a lock, a decorative piece of carved trim concealed a biometric panel. Whitfield leaned in and let the scanner read his eye. The door clicked open. Inside smelled of cedar and clean stone. The electricity worked. The temperature was steady. Security cameras blinked green from the corners of high ceilings. Someone had been maintaining this place, quietly, for a long time. Whitfield led her through a book-lined front parlor, down a short hall, and through a door that opened unexpectedly onto a steel staircase. Modern. Entirely at odds with the house above. 2 flights down, they stepped into a purely utilitarian room. Concrete walls, LED lighting, a workstation with 3 monitors, and a heavy steel door set into the far wall. "Your father discovered, about 3 years ago, that Diane and Felix had been systematically misrepresenting revenue from 3 subsidiary companies," Whitfield said, his voice dropping in the concrete space. "Not ordinary irregularities. A deliberate, organized embezzlement running through an offshore account in Cyprus. By the time he confirmed it, they'd moved roughly $60 million. Nadine sank into the chair before the monitors. Her legs had decided, without consulting her, that they were done standing. He also discovered that his cognitive decline over the previous 18 months, which his physicians attributed to early vascular dementia, wasn't natural. A specialist from the Mayo Clinic found elevated levels of a compound in his blood that, in sustained low doses, produces symptoms indistinguishable from progressive neurological disease. It affects memory, judgment, the ability to manage complex information. It was in his tea, the blend Diane had shipped to the house monthly for 4 years. Nadine pressed a hand over her mouth. He could have gone to law enforcement, Whitfield said. He chose not to. Mercer Capital Holdings employs 4,000 people. A criminal investigation into the controlling family would have triggered covenant defaults on 7 major loans, collapsed the stock, wiped out pension funds he'd spent 20 years building. He wouldn't do that to them. He found another way to solve it. He gestured to the workstation. The drive. She slid the USB into the port. The screens woke, a progress bar moved, and then a video file opened. Gordon Mercer appeared, sitting in the chair Nadine recognized from the parlor upstairs. Thinner than she remembered, drawn, his hands in his lap. But his eyes were the same, dark, direct, the eyes of a man who looked at you and actually saw you. She had forgotten, in 7 years, how much she'd missed being seen by them. "Nadine," he said, his voice rougher and quieter than she remembered. "If you're watching this, James did his job and you did yours. You kept the watch. I'm glad." She pressed her fingers against her eyes. She was not ready for this, and there was no way to become ready, so she just watched. "I have to explain 7 years to you in about 10 minutes, and I know that's not enough, so I'll start with the only part that matters. I love you. I have loved you your entire life. There has not been a single day of the last 7 years when that wasn't true." A sound came out of her she couldn't have described. "I pushed you away after your mother died because I saw what Diane was, and I understood what she'd do with anyone I loved. She'd already tried, twice, in small ways I couldn't prove. If she'd understood you were the person I loved most in this world, you'd have become her primary project. The estrangement was the only armor I could give you that she couldn't take away." He paused, and she could see what the pause cost him. "I know that's not good enough. I know what those years took from you. I'm sorry. I'd make a different choice now, but I was afraid, and I made the one I made, and I'm asking you to forgive me." The steel door behind the workstation clicked, its lock disengaging with a sound like a released breath, and swung open. Gordon's voice went on as Nadine rose and walked toward it. "Diane and Felix believe they've won. They have the operating company. What they don't know is that over the past 36 months, I've been quietly restructuring the company's finances. I moved the primary debt into Lantern Ridge. Mercer Capital Holdings is currently operating on loans that, on paper, belong to 3 separate institutional creditors. They all belong to you. When the holding company fails to meet its debt service next month, and it will, because I've structured it precisely to fail, Lantern Ridge will have the legal authority to accelerate the debt, foreclose on the pledged assets, and seize control of the company." The vault was the size of a large living room. One wall held climate-controlled cabinets of documents, deeds, bond certificates, patent assignments, legal registrations in 8 jurisdictions. Another held a grid of locked steel drawers, each numbered. The air was cool, dry, faintly metallic. "What you're looking at," Gordon's voice continued, "is approximately $1.7 billion in liquid, legally clean, fully documented assets, privately held, 0 exposure to Mercer Capital, 0 connection to any estate under Diane's control. It's been accumulating here for 3 years, moved quietly and legally, in amounts that individually fell below reporting thresholds. James has the full accounting." Nadine stood in the middle of the vault and turned slowly. "I've also given James everything we have on the embezzlement and the poisoning, bank records, communications, the Mayo Clinic report, an independent forensic accountant's findings. He's authorized to turn it over to the FBI, the SEC, and the Texas AG's office the moment you choose. I wanted that timing to be yours. I wanted at least that much in your hands." She walked back to the screens. Her father looked directly into the camera, and she understood he was trying, across whatever distance death makes, to look directly at her. "You're a teacher. You chose a life built around other people. I've always been prouder of that than of anything I ever built. Use this to do what you'd have done anyway, on a larger scale. Protect the employees. Build what you want to build. And if you choose to take apart what Diane and Felix thought they'd won, I won't pretend from wherever I am that I mind." A quiet smile moved across his face. "I love you, Nadine. I should have said it more often, out loud, directly to you. That was my failure. This is my correction." The screen went dark. Nadine stood in the glow of the empty monitors, the broken watch still in her hand, and felt something complicated and enormous shift inside her. The grief was still there. The years were still there, unrecoverable. But underneath them, intact, was something she'd stopped believing in a long time ago. He had known her. He had kept knowing her. All the while she was teaching second graders to read in Cincinnati, telling herself she'd made peace with being forgotten. He'd been here, in Maine, in the dark, thinking of her. She turned to Whitfield. "How soon can we file the debt acceleration?" "The documentation is ready," he said, with a small, precise nod. "My office can initiate it tomorrow morning." "Do it, and call your contact at the FBI field office. Tell them we're ready." 5 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning in mid-December, the executive suite on the 38th floor of the Mercer Capital Holdings Tower had the atmosphere of a room full of people who'd been told, repeatedly, that everything was fine, and were beginning to understand it wasn't. Diane stood at the head of the conference table, phone pressed to her ear, her voice 3 registers above its usual controlled contralto. Felix sat beside her, laptop open, wearing an expression that on a less expensive face would have been called panic. Their CFO, Robert Kells, read from a document with the careful attention of someone trying to locate a sentence that would tell him he'd misread the one before it. He had not misread it. "What do you mean Lantern Ridge is calling the full balance?" Felix said for the 4th time. "That's not possible. Dad restructured those loans with a 5-year extension. We have 3 years left." The extension was conditional on a debt service coverage ratio above 1.4, Kells said flat. "As of the 3rd quarter filing, you're at 1.1. The covenant's broken. They have the legal right to accelerate." "Then we negotiate with them," Diane snapped. "Who are they? I want a name. Who owns that entity?" "It's a blind trust. We can't." The conference room doors opened. James Whitfield walked in first, carrying a leather briefcase and the look of a man who'd been looking forward to this meeting, followed by 2 attorneys from his firm. And then by a woman in a charcoal grey blazer and slim black trousers, dark hair pulled back, posture unhurried. Diane's face, in the moment she recognized Nadine, moved fast through a sequence that was nevertheless legible. Confusion, dismissal, recalculation, and then something that wasn't quite fear but was its immediate neighbor. "What is she doing here?" Felix said. "How did she get into this building?" "Security works for the building's owner," Nadine said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the room without being raised. She was aware of how calm she sounded, and the calm surprised her, because it was real. As of 8:45 this morning, Lantern Ridge LLC executed its foreclosure rights on the building's primary collateral. That includes this office, this floor, and the building itself. Diane laughed one sharp sound. "You're Lantern Ridge, that's what you're telling me. A school teacher from Ohio is a creditor to a $3 billion company." She shook her head. "Gordon would never." "Gordon spent the last 3 years moving assets specifically, so you'd never find them," Nadine said. "He knew how your mind worked. He knew you'd look for money. So he made the money invisible and moved something more valuable into my name instead, the debt you're standing on." Whitfield opened his briefcase and slid a stack of documents across the table, calm and systematic. "Lantern Ridge is the primary creditor on 67% of Mercer Capital's leveraged portfolio. The covenant breach triggered an automatic acceleration clause at midnight Sunday. The grace period has expired. We're here as a courtesy notification. Felix shot up so fast his chair hit the credenza. This is a setup. This is fraud. Our father was mentally incompetent when he... Your father was poisoned, Nadine said, and the room went silent. Not incompetent. Poisoned deliberately over roughly 4 years, with a compound introduced into his food that mimicked neurological decline. The Mayo Clinic identified it. We have the lab reports, the sourcing documentation, and 18 months of communications between the two of you, discussing his condition in terms that are, legally speaking, quite interesting. Diane sat down. It wasn't a choice. Her knees made it for her. The FBI received our full evidentiary package at 7 this morning, Whitfield said, without emphasis, the way one notes a delivery. The SEC received the embezzlement documentation simultaneously. An Interpol notice on the Cyprus account went out yesterday. You can't prove any of that, Diane said, her voice steady, her hands flat on the table and not steady at all. $60 million passed through a Cyprus account, whose signing authority traces to Felix through 2 intermediaries, Whitfield said. 3 independent forensic accountants have reviewed the documentation. You're welcome to contest it. That's what criminal defense attorneys are for. Nadine walked to the head of the table. Diane didn't move, but watched her approach with the look of someone watching a door close that she'd believed, until this moment, would always be open. Nadine reached into her blazer pocket and set the broken pocket watch on the table in front of her, the cracked face catching the fluorescent light, the frozen hands pointing to 11:47. He gave this to me, Nadine said. You thought it was an insult, that was the point. He needed you to believe he was done with me. She stepped back. He was never done with me. 2 men in dark suits waited at the doorway. Not security, federal agents, presenting credentials and asking Diane and Felix, with a courtesy that had nothing warm in it, to come with them. Camille, who'd said nothing since Nadine walked in, looked across the room. Nadine, I didn't know. Nadine held her gaze a moment. Camille was 29 and had spent her life in the orbit of a mother who'd never given her reason to ask where things came from. That wasn't an excuse. It also wasn't what Diane and Felix had done. I know, Nadine said. We'll talk. She turned to the window. 40 stories down, Dallas moved through its Wednesday with no knowledge of and no interest in what was happening above it, which seemed right. The world didn't pause for reckonings. It just continued, and you continued inside it. And sometimes, if someone who loved you had spent 3 years in secret building you a foundation, while the world insisted nothing was coming, you got to stand somewhere solid eventually. Behind her, the room filled with the particular controlled chaos of people being arrested in business clothes. Whitfield appeared at her shoulder. The employees, Nadine said. The pension funds, that's the first thing. We anticipated that. I have a restructuring team on standby. And the lighthouse property, I want to go back. Of course. I'm not selling it, she said. I'm going to need an office in Maine. She stood at the window a while longer, the broken watch back in her pocket, 40 floors of air below her feet, and thought about a man who had loved her quietly, and from a distance, in ways she hadn't been able to see, and who had spent his final years making sure that when she finally needed somewhere to stand, the ground would be there. If this story left you with something, the moment Nadine heard her father say, I love you, after 7 years of silence, the watch that wasn't just a watch, the cold satisfaction of that document sliding across the mahogany table, then you know exactly why stories like this exist. Hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that the thing meant to diminish you sometimes turns out to be the key to everything they thought they'd taken. Subscribe to Own the Drama for more stories that refuse to end the way the wrong people planned. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done the moment you heard that watch click open?